plenary session. And before we begin, can I just set out a few points? A plenary meeting held by video conference in accordance with the standing orders of the Welsh Parliament constitutes Senedd proceedings for the purposes of the Government of Wales Act of 2006. Some of the provisions of Standing Order 34 will apply for today's plenary, and those are noted on the agenda. And I would remind members that standing orders relating to ordering plenary meetings apply to this meeting. So item 1 in this part of the meeting is questions to the First Minister. And the first question is Rhiannon Passmore.
Thank you. What priority has the Welsh Government given to the mental health of children and young people in Islwyn during COVID-19?
Deputy, I thank the member for the question. The Welsh Government has designated children and young people's mental health as an essential service throughout the pandemic. And Alyn Bevan University Health Board has used additional funding provided to develop a range of innovative services involving other statutory and third sector partners.
Diolch. First Minister, last week was Children's Mental Health Week. I was pleased that the government marked it by pledging to support young people's mental health week, and I was pleased that the Welsh Labour government marked it by pledging to support young people's mental health services. This funding could be a real lifeline to so many young people who have been struggling throughout this pandemic. First Minister, can you outline how this funding will be used and how the Welsh Government will ensure it reaches the frontline services that are delivering this support in Islwyn?
Well, thank Rhiannon Passmore for that follow-up question, Llywydd. I can tell her that of the 9.4 million, 5.4 will be used to support CAMS provision, and that will include in-hospital provision, including the development of age-appropriate beds within LHBs where that is necessary, but there will also be a strengthening of support in community mental health teams to provide more intensive services for young people in the community, drawing them down from inpatient admissions. The remainder of the funding, 4 million, will support the expansion of the CAMS Schools InReach pilot programme, and that is used to develop frontline capacity in our schools, and that, Llywydd, is part of the whole thrust of this additional money, which is to de-escalate intervention in the lives of young people. And that, as the member will know, was reinforced further yesterday with an announcement of an additional £2.5 million to support mental health and wellbeing services in our further education colleges, again aimed at the wellbeing of our young people.
Laura Jones.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, I too would welcome any money towards this. Obviously, it's on all of our hearts and minds at the moment, the struggles that many children are going through as the result of this pandemic. As to the parents and families also having to juggle and realign their lives to support them. But I'm just wondering, lots of councils are doing different things across the board in South Wales East, but also across Wales. How has this government finding the examples of best practices of using like online services to support our vulnerable children and those children, reaching out to those children that are needing it right now, and making sure that best practice is spread across all of Wales? Thank you.
Well, sorry, I thank Laura Ann Jones for that question. I agree very much with the premise of it. I think it's very good that there is innovation in different parts of Wales. I know the member will join me in congratulating the Cwtch team at an Alyn Bevan University Health Board, which recently won the Team of the Year award of the Royal College of Psychiatry for its development of telehealth services. And those developments are now being taken up by other health boards in different parts of Wales. And that, I think, is a very sensible way for these services to develop, encouraging local innovation, and as Laura Ann Jones says, where they're demonstrated to have success, then making sure that that success is translated into wider services in the rest of Wales. It's why we have a Welsh National Young People's Mental Health Toolkit That's why we have CBT services available online for young people in every part of Wales, while, as I say, continuing to encourage innovation in third sector and in statutory services in these extraordinary times.
Question 2, Gareth Bennett.
Diolch, Dipper Lywyd. Will the First Minister make a statement in relation to Wales's constitutional status within the United Kingdom?
Dipper Lywyd, Wales is a devolved nation participating voluntarily in the Union of the United Kingdom.
Thanks for that statement. We are going through a very serious health crisis and now also a mass vaccination programme. The procurement of the vaccines has been led by the UK government, and I think most sensible people would agree that it has been a great success and that the procurement of the vaccines is a good example of the UK Union working at its best. The Welsh Conservatives now seem to be belatedly coming over to the benefits of a UK-led approach, even though they failed to support amendments in favour of precisely that approach, which were put forward by my party, the Abolish the Welsh Assembly Party, here in this chamber only 3 weeks ago, but better late than never. I wonder, First Minister, if you agree that it is perhaps time that you now stopped flying your kite about the UK becoming a federation and actually noted the very great benefits that can and did accrue from a UK-wide response to the COVID crisis.
Well, sorry, I'm responsible for the confusions of the Welsh Conservative Party, but what I am responsible for is reaching an agreement with other nations in the United Kingdom when I think it is in Wales's interests to do so. That is why we have a UK-wide procurement of supply of the vaccine, because from the outset, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland all agreed that that was the best way forward. That is what I mean by a voluntary association in the Union of the United Kingdom.
David Melding.
Thank you, Deputy Llywydd. First Minister, do you agree with me that for the future of the Union, the best resource is our citizens, and that it's time for citizens throughout the United Kingdom to be involved in citizens' assemblies to help develop proposals that will lead to a new Act of Union, which will see a United Kingdom coherent constitutionally, I hope, for another 300 years?
Well, I definitely agree with Mr. Melding that in something as important as the future of the country in which we all live, the involvement of citizens in the reshaping of the United Kingdom is vital. I heard the member being interviewed not that long ago, in which he said, and I very much agreed with him, that the current union is over. There's no point in us trying to keep something that no longer has the support it once did going in that way. We need to reshape it in the way the member has just described. And in order to do that, the involvement and the support of citizens is, of course, essential.
Carwyn Jones.
Thank you, Dirprwy Llywydd. First Minister, you share my despair listening to people like Gareth Bennett and in some of the Conservative Party who wish for Wales to have no existence at all. They want to wipe Wales off the map, and all because they can't get elected to government in Wales. Democracy is fine for them as long as they win. First Minister, would you join me in condemning their strong dislike of our land and continue to oppose their feeble attempts to turn our country into a county?
Well, I absolutely agree with that. Llywydd, Wales is not a branch line of anybody else's government. The Welsh Conservative policy is clear these days. It is, a for Wales, see England policy. It's a craven policy, Llywydd. It lets down the people of Wales, and my party in this government will never put ourselves in that position.
Mandy Jones.
Minister. Diolch, Deputy Llywydd. First Minister, since being returned to the Senedd and working on various committees, including the Constitutional and Legislative Affairs Committee, my view on devolution has evolved, and I'm leaning towards a more grown-up relationship between the UK nations and a move to a more federal structure. I'm interested, after hearing you just, in your thoughts on future direction for devolution. Is there actually a middle ground between abolish and independence? Thank you.
Well, Llywydd, I thank the member for that question. I congratulate her on the evolution of her views. I think it's genuinely encouraging when people use the experience that they have to think through these really important issues. And of course there is. My view is there's always been a middle ground between those who wish to separate us off from the United Kingdom and those who wish us to hand us back to Westminster and Whitehall. And that is the policy of devolution, which gives us so much independence of action here in the Senedd to take decisions that affect only people who live in Wales. Those decisions should be made only by people in Wales. But at the same time, when we choose to do so, to pool our voluntary association and to be part of a UK-wide set of arrangements. That, I think, is the best of both worlds for people in Wales, and a position that has been supported by Welsh people now for well over 20 years.
We'll now turn to party leaders' questions, and the first afternoon is Adam Price.
Diolch, Llywydd. Seeing those big, bold, delivered stamps on your annual report's opening page, First Minister, I was reminded of a paper I recently read about your government, which said this: there tends to be a box-ticking drive to ensure manifesto and programme promises can be said to have been met. What I've never seen is an overall attempt to assess whether the desired outcomes underlying the programme are being advanced. Nowhere in your report do you acknowledge your failures, the missed targets, the broken promises. You said you'd eradicate fuel poverty by 2018. You didn't. You said you'd abolish child poverty by 2020. You didn't. You said you'd cut emissions by 40% by last year. You didn't. To quote that paper again about your government, the current mindset puts delivery second best to maintenance of the status quo. Doesn't that just about sum things up, First Minister?
Well, Diplow, the member appears to have picked up the wrong speech. There's a debate on the annual report later this afternoon. He'll be able to recycle his remarks, no doubt, again there. I think people who live in Wales do not share his sneering attitude to 20,000 new affordable homes here in Wales. Those young people who've taken part in the 100,000 additional apprenticeships would not share his view. Neither will those thousands of older people who have benefited from the most progressive approach to people being able to retain their assets when they go into residential care, nor those people who have benefited from the new treatments fund, reducing the length of time waiting for new drugs here in Wales from 90 days to 13 days. Those are real differences in the lives of real people right up and down Wales. That's what I stand for. That's what the Labour Party stands for. He may prefer the vacuities of independence and other high-flown sentiments. We will deal with those things that make a difference in people's lives. And that is why they know that this government is a government that is on their side.
First Minister, the remarks I just read out are not my views. They're the views of someone who was a non-executive director of your government for almost a decade. It's difficult to find a more damning indictment than this statement from them about that experience. I've never been on a board with such a lack of measures of progress or outcome success. You campaign in poetry and govern in prose, so the saying goes, but you deliver in numbers, because without metrics, you are rudderless and directionless. And that's as true of your future vision, First Minister, as it is of your past delivery. This is what Welsh Labour grassroots have to say about your policy proposals for the election in May. They lack transformative edge. They're cautious and uninspiring. They fail to measure up to the scale of the challenges that Wales will face over the years ahead. You can dismiss my criticisms of your government, First Minister, but can you dismiss the words of the very people who campaigned to put you in the position you're now in?
Well, so with our proposals for the next Senedd term will be published in Labour's manifesto. When the member has seen it, he'll be able to make a judgment on it. He hasn't seen it, neither have the people that he appears to quote.
Well, the Labour activists I quoted are critical of your party's final policy document, which I have seen, because it does not commit to extending free school meals. The very policy you've been attacking me on for these last few weeks, it seems I'm now closer to Labour values than you are. The document contains few new ideas, but at least some new admissions. In it, Labour Party members, and I quote, highlighted the need for investment and policy change to build greater resilience to intense weather events, which is a clearer admission than we've ever had from ministers, that you failed to spend enough on flood defences with disastrous consequences. And it's hard to disagree with Labour members when they call in the document for more detail on a Labour vision for the future of farming, when your vision at the moment is no future at all. But perhaps the most telling sentence of all is this: the offer of social care, free at the point of need, another Plaid Cymru policy, is desirable. The question is, First Minister, will it ever be deliverable with you and your party at the helm?
Well, so as I have previously offered the member an opportunity of a membership form for the Labour Party in which he takes such an interest, because if he did, he will be more familiar with the policy-making processes of my party. So my party has not completed its policy-making process. There is no final document to which he mistakenly refers. Indeed, I am looking forward to spending Saturday with members of my party looking at some 700 different proposals that party units right across Wales have contributed to the final stages of our policy-making process. The member, I'm afraid, has simply been misled in believing that he understands the way that the Labour Party operates. We will continue to develop our policies. We will put them in a manifesto. Our manifesto will be a deliverable manifesto. It will not be an uncosted wish list of the sort that he has spent many months now developing. Social care today, more hundreds of millions of pounds that he hasn't got to spend. Never an attempt to tell us where that money will come from, of course, following the last couple of weeks, wish lists in relation to other things that he thinks that simply by dangling them in front of people, he will persuade them to support. The Welsh public, unfortunately for him, is more discerning than he gives them credit for. They will know that when promises are made, the wherewithal to keep them has to be found as well. That is why later this afternoon we will demonstrate that the promises made by my party at the last election have been delivered during this Senedd term. That is what people expect, not the sort of fantasy policy making which the member continues to offer us here.
We'll turn to the leader of the Conservative group, Andrew Archer-Davies.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First Minister, I'd like to address the issue of waiting times in Wales, and I appreciate there's pressures in waiting times across the United Kingdom, but in Wales, for example, they're particularly acute, with 530,000 patients on a waiting list for starting treatment, the highest on record since data was first collected on this format since 2011. 231,000 of those patients have been waiting 36 weeks or more. That's nearly 1,000% increase from November 2019, when 22,000 patients were waiting over 36 weeks. And between March and November, there were 20,000 fewer urgent cancer referrals compared to the same time previously in the last 12 months. This is a matter of huge concern, I think you'll agree, First Minister. So what action is your government doing to address these waiting times here in Wales?
Well, I do agree with the member that waiting times in the NHS are a cause of real concern a year into coronavirus. And he is right that that is a common position right across the United Kingdom. The first thing we have to do, and the most important thing that we can do, is to draw out of the health service the burden that it currently has to bear of people suffering from coronavirus to such an extent that they have to be treated inside a hospital, with all the impact that has on the ability of the health service to carry out all the other things that we quite rightly look to it to do. And in that regard, as the member will know, at present we are succeeding. Positivity rates down in Wales again today. The rates per 100,000 down across Wales again today. And this week, I think for the first time, we can see with some confidence that feeding into a reduction in pressures in the hospital system. For the first time for many weeks, fewer than 1,000 patients with confirmed coronavirus in a hospital bed, and the number of people needing intensive care significantly down in the last week as well. That's the underpinning condition that we have to reach in order to reconstruct the health service for the future. And then when we are sure that we can create that capacity by having COVID-19 under control, then the health service will have a plan, and the plan will be based on clinical prioritization. It will be a plan led by clinicians, making sure that those whose needs are the most urgent will always in Wales be at the front of the queue.
First Minister, it is a fact, as I identified in my opening remarks, that waiting times are large across the United Kingdom. I accept that, but here in Wales they are particularly acute, with 1 in 5 people on a waiting list from the whole population. And where my concern comes into play here is the urgency the government is putting into this to have a plan of recovery out of COVID. When you have the Chief Executive of Tenevis saying that they have faced pushback from ministers when it comes to recovery plans for cancer services, and the report that Macmillan identified last week that 3,500 have gone with undiagnosed cancer because of coronavirus, this surely is a huge concern to us all because of the detrimental impact this has on outcomes and the longer-term pressures on our health service. So why are the cancer charities saying that they are facing pushback from ministers when it comes to putting an urgent cancer plan in place? And if that pushback doesn't exist, will you commit to developing that cancer plan that is urgently required, as Tom Crosby's identified, the cancer lead for Wales, that the cancer services in Wales will have to perform at 120 to 130% of capacity to get into these waiting times that we are facing here in Wales?
Well, so I agree that the challenge that faces the health service post-coronavirus is very real, that it will not be a recovery that will happen overnight, and I agree that it will need to be a recovery that is properly planned and planned with clinicians. There is no pushback from this government in terms of making sure that our health service is in a position to recover. There is a dialogue. And a dialogue does mean that there will be competing perspectives and different pressures. Now, the Health Minister has been in conversation with interests in the cancer field very recently indeed, in order to be able to plan ahead, as I said in my answer to the first question this afternoon from Rhiannon Passmore. Cancer services have been classified as an essential service by the Welsh Government right through the pandemic. We have to do more to give patients sometimes the confidence to come forward and to take up treatment when they are fearful of the level of coronavirus in circulation. And I echo the views of the Health Minister, which I've heard him say very recently, that where people have treatments available to them, particularly where those treatments are urgently necessary, we urge those people to come forward, because our health service has organised itself to make sure that those treatments can be delivered safely and successfully.
Regrettably, in that answer, First Minister, I didn't hear you identify the plan to take services forward so they can engage with some of those 3,500 people who've gone undiagnosed, as well as developing services across Wales to meet the challenge of the waiting times that I addressed to you in my first question. And we do know that waiting times were a problem before the pandemic, where twice as many patients were waiting over a year than the rest of the whole of England. It is really important that we understand the level of activity that's going on in the NHS at the moment. Will you commit to publishing the activity data that the Welsh Government holds on procedures within the NHS here in Wales? And will you also commit to convening a national recovery board of the professions to make sure that working with government ministers, patients and clinicians within the health service can have confidence that these plans are being developed and will be implemented, so that we do not continue getting reports such as the Macmillan report last week that identified so many undiagnosed cases of cancer across Wales? And could you commit to publishing your response to the Secretary of State for Wales and the Secretary of State for Health in England when they offered mutual aid to support any efforts that might be put forward here in Wales to address waiting times and the addressing of getting people through the health service?
Well, so if the final point is a piece of nonsense, isn't it? We publish figures monthly. The so-called offer from the Secretary of State was sent to us just at the point when English hospitals became overwhelmed by the level of coronavirus that they were facing. There's no offer of mutual aid in a system where they have twice the level of infection that we do here in Wales. It really, to be honest, to be frank, Llywydd, it's just a piece of political games playing, and it undermines the effort of those of us who want to have a serious four-nation approach to recovering from this pandemic. I've set out the plan already, Dipra Llywydd. The first part of the plan is to get coronavirus under control. I note that for the second week in a row, neither opposition party leader wants to ask me any question about the most vital part of the health service in Wales today, the outstandingly successful vaccination programme here in Wales. As ever with opposition parties, whenever anything is going well in Wales, they don't have a good word to say for it. For 2 weeks running, they couldn't find even a single question to ask about that outstanding success. That success will allow us to do what I explained to the member, and that is to help us to get coronavirus under control, to draw out of the health service the pressure that it currently feels in dealing with the pandemic, and then to recover and to restore services outside coronavirus on the basis of clinical need. That will, of course, be designed with the professional groups who we are lucky enough to have in the health service in Wales. And the serious job, rather than the petty point scoring approach to health service recovery, is one which people in Wales can be sure that this government will pursue on their behalf.
Question 3, Jack Sargent.
Diolch, Deputy Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the progress of the vaccination rollout in Alyn and Deeside?
So the vaccination rollout in Alyn and Deeside continues to accelerate, thanks to the commitment and dedication of all those involved in delivering this outstanding programme throughout the constituency.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. Now, the vaccine rollout in Wales continues to gain pace. Wales now has vaccinated more of its population than any other nation in the United Kingdom. Public sector workers once again showing that they can deliver, and they do deliver when we need them. First Minister, how confident are you that we will meet the middle of February deadline as promised? Secondly, how confident are you that we can continue to create more capacity going forwards into the next stage of the vaccination programme? And finally, First Minister, I understand that professionals are working extremely hard to protect the NHS and the vulnerable through a massive flu vaccination rollout as well. Will you join me in congratulating everyone involved in both programmes?
Well, so I thank Jack Sargent for an opportunity for the Senedd to talk about what everybody else in Wales is talking about. And that is the astonishing success of our National Health Service and those other public sector workers, the local government officers who have helped us to open up mass vaccination centres, who found the desks, who found the chairs, who found the rooms, those volunteers who welcome people on arrival, those members of the armed forces, when every part of Wales are part of that enormous vaccination effort. And it's right to put on record this afternoon. Just think of the last weekend. On Friday, we went through the 500,000 barrier in terms of the number of people vaccinated in Wales. On Saturday and Sunday, on Friday and Saturday, we vaccinated 1% of the whole of the population of Wales on both days. And on Monday, we went through 600,000 people who've now successfully been vaccinated. It is an enormous tribute. At the time, as Jack Sargent said, that our health workers are doing all the other things that we ask of them, including that flu vaccination programme, which, by the way, has once again been an outstanding success in North Wales in particular. And in the members' constituency, we have some of the best flu uptake figures anywhere in Wales. To do all of that at the same time while responding to winter pressures, while doing all the other things that Andrew R.T. Davies talked to me about, it's a remarkable effort, and we owe those people an enormous debt of gratitude. And I'm very glad to have the chance to put that on the record here this afternoon. And we will, be asking even more of them in the weeks to come, because very soon, not only will we be offering a first vaccination to everybody in groups 5 to 9 of the priority list, we will be offering a second vaccine to everybody on groups 1 to 4. And the member asked me if I'm confident that we will complete the vaccination of groups 1 to 4 within the time frame that we set out and promised. And I'm very pleased to say to him that I am very confident that we will achieve that here in Wales.
Mark Isherwood.
Yeah. Well, Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board stated last Thursday no vaccines will go to waste, as we're using a standby list created in accordance with the national priority groups. However, many Flintshire residents have contacted me concerned otherwise. One said a neighbour had a knock on the door from a new resident who said every day there are spare vaccinations as many people were not turning up, and if she was interested in a jab, her contact at Deeside Vaccination Centre would call her later in the day. Another said I'd been made aware of a person employed on IT duties, age 26, with no underlying health conditions, vaccinated at short notice. This is the third situation where I've heard of somebody that outside of the rollout criteria being vaccinated on short notice. Another said there are people who are not frontline NHS staff, over 80, etc., receiving appointments to have the vaccine. None had underlying health conditions. They also copied me on Deeside Vaccination Centre's online booking form, asking why is this being shared and used by everyone who shouldn't be eligible for the vaccine? What therefore is going on when surely any standby list should prioritise people like frontline police officers and teachers?
Well, Sally, then we've heard the only Conservative contribution to the astonishing success story that is vaccination here in Wales. A collection of random and unattributed anecdotes that really don't amount to a single piece of serious commentary. Let me tell the member, the health service across Wales, and in Betsy Cadwallader too, is working as hard as it possibly can to deliver vaccination in line with the JCVI advice. Of course, health boards have reserve lists. So when people are unable, for all sorts of reasons, to take up an appointment at short notice, there are other people who can be called upon so that vaccine does not go to waste. What could possibly be objectionable in that? Would it not have been more fitting this afternoon if the Conservative Party could have found it in it to congratulate those people for everything that they are doing? Instead, when 628,000 people have successfully been vaccinated, he wants to talk to us about 3 people he's heard from who appear to have a complaint.
Question 4, Dalith Jewell.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the delivery of COVID-19 vaccines in South Wales East?
I thank the member for that question, Llywydd. Over 100,000 vaccinations have now been carried out in South Wales East in line with the advice of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation.
Thank you. First Minister, I want to ask you about vaccinations for people with learning disabilities living in care homes, which is an issue raised with me by a number of constituents. These families thought their loved ones would be vaccinated in the first priority groups due to the Health Minister's pledge in this chamber that all care home residents and staff would have received a vaccination by the end of January, but care homes for people with learning disabilities were not included. I've spoken to family members of residents with severe learning disabilities who fear for their loved ones' safety, since people with learning disabilities have been 6 times more likely to die from COVID due to their vulnerability. I understand from MENCAP that only 3,500 or so people live in residential or supported living settings. Given the phenomenal figures that you've just been quoting, 34,000 vaccinations were delivered in Wales on Saturday alone. Surely providing these vaccinations would have a negligible effect on the general rollout. And finally, it should surely also be a responsible use of public resource, since caring for people with severe learning disabilities in hospital can be particularly difficult due to behavioural issues and a lack of language skills. So, First Minister, could I please therefore ask you to give serious consideration to changing this policy?
Well, Llywydd, I have to make it clear to the Senedd once again that this Welsh Government follows the advice of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. The care homes that are included in the top 4 priority groups are the care homes identified by that committee. Where people with learning difficulties are captured by those top 4 priority groups, of course they will have been vaccinated. Where they are not, then they will appear in the next set of priority groups. Now, it is no use members here thinking that they know better than the JCVI. I've already heard from Mark Isherwood wanting me to overturn the JCVI advice and to put police officers further up the list. I've had questions on the floor of the Senedd by other members wanting me to put teachers at the top of the list, and now the member wants me to overturn the JCV advice for another group in the population. Every one of those groups has a case to make, and often a case which is compelling in its own terms. But the Welsh Government cannot overturn the advice that all 4 governments of the United Kingdom are following. Now, I noticed what the First Minister of Scotland, from the member's sister party, said when she was being asked on the floor of the Scottish Parliament to do what she is asking me to do, to overturn the JCVI prioritisation list and to put people further up it than would be the case of the JCVI. And she said on the floor of the Scottish Parliament, our duty is to vaccinate in line with the JCVI recommendations. I agree with the First Minister of Scotland there. That is what we are doing in Wales. That is what is happening in the area of Wales that the member represents. And I cannot and will not do what I would think would be an irresponsible thing and depart from the advice that we have received.
Kevin David.
I've been in contact with constituents who've had the vaccine and both the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca vaccine. And 2 key questions that have been raised with me have been, first of all, about the timing for the second jab in the Aneurin Bevan Health Board area. Are we confident that they will be on course to receive that in the time that is designated? Would the First Minister give an assurance on that? And also with regard to the AstraZeneca vaccine, is he confident that the efficacy of the vaccine will not be affected substantially by the South African variant and other variants? And in that case, would there be a programme for booster jabs to be delivered via the Aneurin Bevan University Health Board for people in the constituency?
Oh, sorry, thank the member for both of those important questions. On the timing of the second dose of the vaccine, I've been contacted by a number of people telling me how pleased they were that when they went away from the mass vaccination centre where they'd received their first jab, they were given the date and the time to come back for their second vaccination. I think that gave them a lot of confidence that the system here in Wales is already geared up for what will be, a major challenge over coming weeks and months, because from now on, not only will we be offering a first vaccination to people in the next set of priority groups, but we will be offering a second vaccination to people who we've already offered a first to as we complete groups 1 to 4. That is a major challenge, but as you've seen, the health service in Wales has risen magnificently to the first challenge, and I'm confident that the plans are in place to allow that second dose of vaccine to be delivered in time with the advice that we have from the JCVI. As to the efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccination for the South African variant, there is still a great deal of work being done by scientists to assess that efficacy, and we get advice directly to the Welsh Government through those scientific communities. The preferable course of action, of course, is to make sure that we don't have the South African variant in circulation here in Wales, and a huge effort is going on to make sure that in that small number of cases that have been identified, everything is being done to prevent onward transmission. What we need to see, I believe, is a stronger set of defences at our borders. The UK government's red list is the bare minimum of what needs to be done to make sure that all the gains that are being made in suppressing the virus and vaccinating our population are not put at risk by people coming into the United Kingdom from other parts of the world, when further new variants may already be in the brew. So work going on the efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccination, but more could be done to mitigate the risk of those new variants coming into the United Kingdom in the first place.
Question 5, Laura Ann Jones. I think, there we go.
Okay, sorry. What action is the Welsh Government taking to formulate a strategy to ease lockdown restrictions?
Thank the member for that question. Our approach to easing restrictions will continue to be based on the latest scientific evidence and medical advice. We will ease lockdown in a gradual way and update our coronavirus control plan to take account of new variants and the vaccination rollout.
Thank you, First Minister. Obviously, public safety is of paramount importance, and we need to do everything we need to at the right time. But our businesses need as much warning as possible about when they can start preparing to get back to business. The CBI Wales has called on the Welsh Government to work on a roadmap out of lockdown so businesses can be ready when the time is right. In particular, they want you to confirm what will be considered low, medium and high risk economic activities so that businesses can understand what will be open sooner and later. Businesses I've been in contact with are crying out for more clarity so they can invest and plan for reopening. Do you have an exit strategy in place that can be provided in part to provide that clarity and much needed information for our businesses? Thank you.
Well, so it's called the Coronavirus Control Plan. It was published on the 14th of December. It sets out our alert level framework. It tells people in Wales what the indicators are that we will use to decide whether Wales is at a level 4 set of restrictions, level 3, level 2, and it explains what will be possible in terms of reopening the economy, personal life, sporting and cultural activity at each of those levels. The plan was published in that way precisely in order to offer the sort of certainty that the member has asked for. I think it's all there. Now, I said in my original answer, that we will update that plan because it was drawn up before the Kent variant was widely understood and before the vaccination programme had got underway. So I'm keen that we should update the plan to take account of those positive developments on the one hand and challenging developments on the other. But when we update it, it will continue to do what it set out to do, and that is to give people as much certainty as we can in the highly uncertain circumstances of the pandemic by giving people a clear sense of the indicators we will use to move between levels and the sort of activity that could be resumed when we are in a position to move out of level 4, as we are today, and to move down the levels, restoring freedoms as we do so.
John Griffiths.
Diolch, Deputy Lewis. First Minister, there's a great deal of concern in Wales at the effect on children and young people of the pandemic and the restrictions, which I know you very much share. And I very much agree with you in terms of the priority of getting our children back to school as quickly as possible, possibly starting with foundation phase children. Would you also agree that we need to get our young people, our children, able to take part in sport and the many activities that they enjoy for the mental and physical health advantages, as well as the social interaction that involves? And when there is some leeway to do so, First Minister, would restoring those activities be amongst perhaps the first thoughts that you have as to how we can ease restrictions?
I would like to thank John Griffiths for those points, and indeed they are points that Laura Ann Jones herself has put to me in the past. And the coronavirus control plan that I referred to does very specifically say that supervised children's activities can resume when we're in a position to move towards alert level 3. I very much agree with the points the member made about the impact that the whole of the last 12 months has made on children and young people. That is why our top priority is to get those young people back into the classroom. But as more headroom appears, provided it does, then offering those young people opportunities outside school, particularly in the open air, will be very much part of the thinking of this government.
Question 6, Mick Antoniv.
What have the Welsh Government's international priorities been during the COVID-19 pandemic, First Minister?
During the early months of the pandemic, our international activity included obtaining PPE and assisting the UK government to help Welsh citizens return home from abroad. The recently published international action plans set out our priorities in supporting Wales's recovery from the pandemic.
Well, thank you for that answer, First Minister. As the UK has left the European Union, I certainly think it is now vital that Wales establishes its own role in the world as a nation, as a right. Now, the Welsh Conservative Party have made it clear that they would massively restrict the ability of Welsh Government to engage with other countries by cutting the funding to those areas that are not overtly devolved, effectively gagging Wales's voice in the world and preventing us from speaking up for our nation and businesses overseas. It's clear to the majority of us here that this approach would have massively hampered the benefits international cooperation has brought to Wales, particularly during the coronavirus pandemic. So, First Minister, during this pandemic, what role has Wales played internationally? And what are the Welsh Government's ambitions for future international engagement and international cooperation?
Well, I thank Mick for that question. He's absolutely right. There's never been a more important time to sustain the profile and the reputation of Wales abroad. We remain an outward-looking international nation, and that has been very important to us during the coronavirus crisis. Directly in the contacts that the Chief Medical Officer has had with colleagues in South Korea and Sweden, and in the Robert Koch Institute in Germany, for example, in the work that Public Health Wales has done alongside the World Health Organization. It has been very important, I believe, to have sustained our links with key international networks over the past 12 months. Grateful to the member for representing Wales at the last meeting of the UK Committee of the Regions contact group, and grateful to David Rees and to Russell George for agreeing to be representatives for Wales in those future arrangements. We haven't stepped back, during the past 12 months for our involvement, for example, in chairing the Vanguard initiative, an initiative amongst a series of regional governments in Wales, looking at smart specialisation and capitalising on the strengths that we have in South East Wales in particular. And I know that Mick Antoniou will have paid particularly close attention to the continuing actions we have taken through the Wales for Africa programme, the PONT group in his own constituency, having played such an important part in all of that. And Deepa, I expect that to be part of the rest of this calendar year as well. In the last couple of months, I have met ambassadors from Japan, the president of the Basque country, the ambassador from Germany. I met the foreign and defence minister of the Republic of Ireland. I'm to meet the New Zealand High Commissioner tomorrow. All of these contacts demonstrate that there is an appetite in the rest of the world to maintain their contact with Wales. That is essential to us in terms of future trade opportunities and cultural exchange, and in terms of making sure that Wales's reputation in the rest of the world is powerfully sustained. And I thank the member for the contribution which he has made to all of that throughout this Senedd term.
Question 7, Nick Ramsey.
Diolch, Dipri Llawydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on support for the rural economy during the pandemic?
Dipri Llawydd, the Welsh Government has taken a range of steps to support the entire economy, as well as making specific funding available for the rural economy in Wales.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. As you've just highlighted, the rural economy faces different and various challenges compared to urban areas, and that's always been the case pre the pandemic as well. The pandemic has exposed how vulnerable our rural way of life can be. Has any assessment been made of how many job losses there have been in rural communities compared to urban areas, and how many losses of companies there have been? And how is support being specifically tailored so that it is suited to the particular issues which rural issues are facing at the moment, and indeed as we come out of the pandemic and hopefully grow back better?
Well, shall I thank the member for the important question. He will know that at the present moment, the level of job losses in the UK economy are quite difficult to discern. The job retention scheme, which we have supported, has suppressed the level of job losses, and the Bank of England and the OBR tell us that it will not be until the second and third quarters of this year that we get a proper sense of the economic impact that coronavirus and Brexit, leaving the European Union, have had on our economy. So at this point, I think it's quite difficult to have identified with any reliability the level of job losses in different parts of the Welsh economy, whether that is sectoral or geographical. The Welsh Government's help has, though, been very specifically directed to sectors of the economy which are important in parts of rural Wales. The support that we provided to the tourism sector, for example, is a very important component of the economy of rural communities in many parts of Wales. And the additional help that we have announced in recent weeks will go on sustaining that industry through until the end of March. And I'm very happy in the way that the member suggested to make sure that we go on working with those interests that represent the different parts of the rural economy here in Wales, to make sure that as we move beyond coronavirus and into the recovery period, that this Welsh Government will go on supporting them so that they are able to resume the economic activity that they wish to be able to carry out in order to be able to create successful futures in those industries.
Thank you very much, First Minister. Item 2 on the agenda this afternoon's questions to the Counsel General and the Minister for European Transition in respect of his law officer responsibilities. And the